The first question is from an anonymous. Is it the right way to try to teach the mind that there is no me? This is not me. How so?
So teaching the mind to have wisdom arise, or the seeing of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and not self, these are the method for us to develop wisdom. So developing the wisdom by contemplating on the rupa, form or materiality, and nama, the mentality or material phenomena. So rupa, form has the bodily form, our bodies, bodies of others. The nama is the feelings, the perceptions, mental formations, and the sense consciousness. So it is all not self, not me. So when wisdom arises, then we're able to let go, and we won't have suffering, or we'll be able to be free from suffering, because the attachment, the clinging, this is the cause for suffering to arise. So the mind that is firmly established in sila, samadhi, and panya, morality, concentration, and wisdom, it goes against, you could say, fights against the kilesas, the mental defilements. And if the path factors are strong, then you'll be able to win over these defilements. But if the kilesas are stronger, then attachment, clinging will arise, and that will be the cause for suffering to arise. So that we're coming here to practice now is so that we can develop our mindfulness and wisdom to arise, so that we're able to go against and fight against the mind, or the original mind, that it has that delusion and ignorance. And sometimes we will be able to win against the defilements, and at other times we will be defeated by them. But this is natural to have it this way and to be like this. So to see and to teach the mind that rupa and nama, materiality, mentality, is not self, not me, not mine, that is the correct path to practice. So all the feelings that arise with the mind, whether it's pleasant feelings, unpleasant feelings, or neither pleasant or unpleasant feelings, these are all not to be taken as a self. And the mind that has the defilements of greed, anger, delusion, or the mind that doesn't have greed, anger, delusion, again, that's not a self. And so everything that arises, then we teach the mind that that isn't a self, it's not me. And then this is when we can have letting go, just seeing things as being simply their state. They're simply so, they're just the way they are, whether they're the form, the feelings, mental formations, perceptions, sense consciousness arising, they're simply those phenomena that arise. They're not a self. But first, we do have this sense of self, and we do take this sense of self in order to build goodness, to practice dana, sila, and bhavana, training the mind. So we have to use that self to train our minds first, so that we're able to develop wisdom. But that we're able to use contemplation or bring up wisdom or gain wisdom in this way, we do have to have all our spiritual faculties ready or sufficient. So our mindfulness has to be enough, our samadhi, concentration, has to be enough as well. Because then when we teach the mind will believe it, what we're teaching it. It will believe that it's not me, not mine. And then this will lead the mind to let go. But in the beginning, when we have this sense contact, eyes sees form, ear hears sound, etc., when we have sense contact, then a self arises. Greed, anger, delusion arises instantly, and it happens so quickly. So we need to have the mindfulness to teach the mind that it isn't me, it isn't mine. But if we have very strong clinging attachments, then when we try to teach the mind this, the mind won't let go, or it won't reduce the clinging there. So we need to then train the mind first to have calm and peace through using our kammatthana, our meditation object. If we have a lot of anger and we say that it's not me, it's not mine, and wisdom doesn't arise, that's because our mindfulness and samadhi is just too weak. And so we then need to develop the object of metta, loving kindness, goodwill. We need to train in that. Or we reflect on death, that we must die for sure, they must die for sure. And this then may be able to reduce, lessen the clinging there. So in the beginning, we have to develop that samatha, tranquility, meditation, make the mind peaceful, or we develop metta, goodwill, so that we'll be able to reduce and lessen that anger. And we can reflect all living beings, they want to have happiness and they don't want to experience suffering. And so when we reflect in the right way, then the mind can have more ease and peace can arise. And so the level of peace must be enough for us to be able to teach the mind. We must be able to separate somewhat the mind and the objects, or the sense objects or mental objects. Then we can teach the mind and wisdom then arises. Like the teachers, they'll teach us that we teach ourselves we teach ourselves that it isn't a me, it isn't a mine, but that is for someone that has a solid base of samadhi. But for Dhamma practitioners, we may be able to teach ourselves sometimes, and the mind will believe it sometimes. But if it doesn't yet believe it, it won't reduce that clinging, then we have to train the mind first in having that foundation of peace and calm.
The next question is from Singapore, from Mr. Tan Peng Bun. During meditation, my mind drifts to fantasies and stories that are not real. When I notice them, I bring the mind back. May I know if it is possible for the mind to settle and ground itself to reality? Or should I not get too worried about it? Thank you.
So samadhi is this firmly concentrated mind. Sati is recollection or mindfulness. Sampajanya is clear awareness. So we come to train our minds to be peaceful, but in the beginning, the mind will proliferate a lot because it's used to that. It's made a habit out of that. Ever since we've been born, we've been learning to use our thinking mind, proliferating about learning, using thoughts, memorizing. There's thoughts and proliferations about the past, proliferations about the future. And so the mind isn't peaceful within this present moment, or it's not able to stay there for very long. And we can notice this in the span of one day, how much proliferation that comes up. It's all involved or coming from a sense of self, me and mine. There's liking to something, and then the mind proliferates in that way following that. There's disliking arising, and then the mind proliferates following that. So when we come to train the mind at first, then we want the mind to be peaceful, but it's not, we're unable to do that at first. There's a lot of proliferation there still, so we just have our mindfulness, bring up mindfulness to follow that proliferation. We just determine our efforts and we endure and very patient with it a lot. All these sort of fantasies and stories and thoughts may come up of all sorts, and we may sit meditation for 30 minutes and we're already at the end of the meditation sit, and we've just brought back our awareness just then at the end of that sit. Or maybe walking meditation, and there's all sorts of thoughts there, or proliferations, all sorts of stories coming up. Even for some Dhamma speakers, they may be able to walk meditation for 4 hours, but through that whole 4 hours, they're thinking about what to talk about, or thinking about the Dhamma that they're going to give a sermon on. And so they may be peaceful to one level where the mind isn't going to anything outside of that Dhamma that they're going to give, but it's still proliferating in that scope of Dhamma. And so there's still proliferations there, and so they may be skilled at giving Dhamma talks, but they haven't yet gained that level of peace in their mind. But it's still proliferating of a meritorious type. But the one that goes beyond thought, this is what we call kusala, or skillful. That one is beyond or above all merit. So the Buddha, he did say that if one can gain just a small peace or a day of peace, then even if one had a very long life of 100 years and never gaining that same peace, that the result of just a small moment of peace has much greater result than even a long life without peace. And so that peace is a lot of merit then. And so one just has to endure in the beginning and put in the effort in the practice, and one day the mind will become peaceful. If one sits meditation and the mind's thinking a lot, one can try to instead listen to Dhamma, a Dhamma talk along with their meditation, and that may help. Or one can try to chant a lot until the mind feels very tired and worn out. In Wat Nong Papong, Venerable Ajahn Anan was sharing the story that when he was there and they were building the Uposatha hall there, they had a work duty or project there that they had to carry the dirt for the land of the Uposatha hall. And it was very sort of coarse work, and there was some talking involved, and the body was physically very tired because they'd been working already for 4 hours like that, so it was very tiring. But then he thought to himself that, oh, why don't I establish mindfulness with what I'm doing in this present moment? And so then he established his mindfulness that when he received the bucket of dirt from his right hand and passed it on to the other monk with his left hand, he would establish mindfulness with that whole process established in the present moment. And from this, he was able to gain rapture, and the mind became peaceful. The body and mind felt very light. And so we can do and develop our mindfulness in that way in order to overcome the proliferations and thoughts until we're able to make the mind peaceful. We then can establish the mind in the present moment. But in the beginning, you don't worry about it too much. Just come down to the training. If there's a lot of fantasies, stories, and thoughts coming up, you can reflect, contemplate to yourself that life is uncertain. It's not a sure thing. Why bother thinking about all these fantasies and stories? We may die, or life is uncertain. So whether it's thoughts of the past or thoughts of the future, then you see the drawbacks of that and come back and seeing that it's much better to be in this present moment here. And maybe from that one is able to see the Dhamma. There was once in the time of the Buddha when Venerable Ananda had a friend, a lay friend who was a merchant, and he did some trading between various cities like Rajagaha, Varanasi, and where Jetavana was, Savatthi. And so this layman's mind, this merchant, he was always thinking about his business and how to make a profit. And so the Buddha, when Venerable Ananda asked or talked to the Buddha about this lay friend, the Buddha told him that your friend doesn't have much time left to live. And so Venerable Ananda told his friend this, and that he wouldn't have much of his life left, and so that he shouldn't be heedless or careless in his life. Don't think about only money and your business. And this layperson was quite wise himself, that he thought, oh, Venerable Ananda coming to tell me this, it wasn't something easy or simple. And so this was coming from the Buddha's great goodwill or metta and compassion. And so he, instead of thinking of just the money and business, then he came back, brought up mindfulness and samadhi, and he was able to make the mind peaceful and gained to Sotapanna, stream entry. And that night he became very ill and died that night. But he was very lucky that the Buddha had great kindness and compassion for him, that Venerable Ananda had come to tell him about that, and that before he died, he was able to see the Dhamma. So try to establish yourself and be in the present moment as much as you can.
The next question is from an anonymous. Dear Ajahn, thanks so much for taking up this question. May I know how one can practice middle path as a lay person, especially a mother of 2 children, aged 7 and 1? Am I being selfish by attending retreats Dhamma, despite the children being so young? Usually, if possible, I would love to bring them to attend the session. Am I being selfish too? Thanks, Ajahn.
So assisting and bringing up your child or children, this is practicing Dhamma within our own minds. Having metta, goodwill, loving kindness, and compassion is bhavana, it is developing the mind. And a mother is the Brahma god of the children, the first teachers of the children. So for your children, 1 year and 7 years old, you have that status. And so when you have the time for yourself, that you're not skipping over any of the duties that you have to do, that everything's ready and everything's been looked after well, then you can go to practice the Dhamma. And if you don't have the time to go on a meditation retreat, that's fine. You can also do your own practice at home. You do your chanting, you can do meditation, walking meditation. You train the mind when you have the time. And that isn't selfish, because you're using your time to give the utmost benefit. And so then when you've trained your mind well, that you have wisdom, arise, that all you have these spiritual qualities, then later on you'll be able to teach your child well, to have wisdom following you. And at the times when you really have to be looking after your children, that maybe they're unwell, then you'll have that endurance, you'll have the metta there to be able to fulfill your duties well. And so you can use your time well when you have the appropriate time. And even those who have husbands, they still can find the time to practice, or have periods where they even seek some seclusion as well. It just comes from being very determined in the mind to practice. And so the middle path of practice is developing sati, mindfulness. Then the mind is practicing the middle path. Having and developing sila, samadhi, panya is the middle path. And so you can, when you're at home, you're not foregoing your duties or skipping over any of your duties so that other people will be inconvenienced and harmed because of it. But you're also not giving up all your time so that you're harmed because of it. So it's just the right amount where you're not causing harm to others and to yourself. And that's then not being selfish, but is marga. It is the path that will free yourself from suffering.
The next question is from an anonymous. Venerable Sir, I have been practicing samatha vipassana for more than 10 years. Have attended retreats in different traditions, starting with my core practice, which continues to be Koen Kachi's Burmese tradition. And though I have been enriched from them all, I always wonder, as a layperson, should I look out for an external guru, or should I just trust my inner guru and just keep walking the Dhamma path on my own?
So in Dhamma practice, the developing of samatha kammatthana and vipassana kammatthana, the objects of tranquility and insight, this is what, or the correct path that one will see the Dhamma. And so being within, staying within the Noble Eightfold Path, or the trainings of sila, samadhi, panya is the right path. And so you're asking if you need to have a guru or a great teacher, a Kruba Ajahn. If you're practicing already and wisdom arises, you're able to see the body, the feelings, perceptions, mental formations, sense consciousness as being simply simply just being as they are. You're able to see the Dhamma or see into that Dhamma. Then that's because you're able to stay on the Noble Eightfold Path. But if the mind is very refined, so if the mind is, or if you're practicing outside of the path, or that Noble Eightfold Path, then one won't be able to see the Dhamma. So you may practice by trying to see all rupa and nama, material mental phenomena like feelings, simply arising and ceasing, but actually it's not true insight, it's just proliferation, the samadhi is not enough, and it's really just perceptions and thinking there. Or if one has a very deep amount of peace, the mind's very refined, and maybe there arises things like bright lights or visions, and one may understand that this is the paths and fruits of nibbana, then that is something that is worrying, because it can be vipassana kilesa, which is like the defilements of insight, and that can become an obstruction to our path to nibbana, the paths and fruits of nibbana. So in that case, then one needs to have a great teacher to help advise one on how to overcome what one is experiencing or being obstructed by, because those Kruba Ajahn or that Kruba Ajahn teacher has been past it or has got past that obstruction already. It's just like for children, maybe they're very young children and they aren't really in much danger because they have their parents looking after them. Maybe they're just 7 to 10 years old. But later on, when they get older, maybe 14, 15 years old, their body becomes strong, and then they have much more of a sense of self come up, and maybe they don't listen to their parents anymore. So the practice is the same, that when one is still beginning out, doesn't have much samadhi, then it's not too much of a danger. But later on, if there's very deep samadhi there, the mind goes very deep, there's great rapture and bliss, then maybe the kilesas, the defilements, will say that, oh, you have to just watch the mind, and then you'll be able to attain to arahantship. So it may come up like that, or in various ways like that, because one sees that the body is something very coarse, too coarse for one in whatever state one's in now to use for contemplation. So the defilements will say that, oh, having this level of samadhi, then you should contemplate the mind, and you'll attain. And so this is when one needs to have that teacher, the great teacher, to help one, advise one, instruct one, because they've gone past it already. And they'll say to have mindfulness and develop mindfulness with the body, see the body clearly, because at the moment that samadhi is really just covering up the defilements there. It hasn't yet gone past it. And so we think that we're very high state already, but the great teacher will be able to tell us properly. So if you don't have any problems in your practice right now, then you can just simply go on as you're doing, but you also can't be careless as well in the practice, because if you get deluded in the path, then it can be quite scary. Being deluded in the path, when one's on the path, is much more scarier than if one's deluded by going outside of the path, because if you've gone outside of the path, you can still come back to the path. But if you're deluded and lost inside the path, then it's scary. And that's the type that they believe themselves so much, and that is the one that obstructs one's path, the paths and fruits of Nibbana.
The next question is from an anonymous. Dear Long Pa, I have recently left my job as I wanted to have more time and peace of mind to focus on my practice. However, my attachment to the sense of security that a job and salary brought is much stronger than I thought. This has affected my practice. The thought enters my mind frequently when I am meditating. I feel fear and insecure. Can Long Pa advise how I can remove the attachment and sense of insecurity? Thank you.
So you have to reflect on whether you're really ready and prepared for that type of practice and time. So you have to see if you have the wisdom and able to not worry about your circumstance, so that you're able to go practice for a period of time alone like that. For you do, or for people, they still have to have a livelihood. They still need to be able to support themselves with the 4 basic requisites, so that you're able to live comfortably in the world. And so those who haven't yet ordained as monastics, then they have to look after themselves. And so then you have to think and reflect on your situation to see if you're really ready or not. If you don't work, will you be okay or not? If you get sick, then what will you do? Will you be able to be okay or not? So you may not be ready for it, that level of time and practice. And so then you may have to go find some money and wealth in the world for a period of time so that you can prepare yourself well, so that you can practice in a way that you don't have to work and you won't have to worry about the future. Because you do have to be able to look after yourself, help yourself. So all people, they have to think in this way. What happens if I don't have work? Will I then have enough money to live on? Even those who go to ordain for the rest of their life, before they go, they may have thoughts sort of circling all around the world and in all situations, and thinking about how will I be able to live and get by? What happens if I don't have money then and I've given everything up? What happens if I get sick? So they have to think about that. But in summary or conclusion, then you can think that this life of yours, it's uncertain. It's not sure how long you're going to live for. You may die very soon even. And if the mind's able to accept that if you have to die, then so be it. Then you're able to overcome the thoughts and worries or troubles and difficulties from your choice in dedicating yourself to practice like that. For you, you've already given up your job, so you might as well try it out then. Try to see that this worry that you have is something normal. If you go and if you are working, then you would be still worrying, but in a different type, or worrying about other things. So you can see and contemplate that life, it may only be a span of 1 day left, or maybe even just half a day. So you can think that if you're able to reflect in this way, if you can reflect on this death, then you may not have thoughts and worries like you're having. So you can just try to practice first, try to be able to overcome that worry. But if you can't overcome that worry and the mind's still very restless, then you may have to go back and work and earn some money for a certain amount of time. But if you're able to overcome these sort of mental thoughts and objects, and you're able to bring up rapture and bliss in your practice, then that will overcome the worry in the mind.
The final question for today is from the UK by Ms. Rasana. Dear Long Pa, Vandana, I am confused. Beings in the Brahmaloga cannot hear us, and they do not need to be born again, yet they have not attained Nibbana. If so, what is the difference between attaining Nibbana, as the Buddha and many of his disciples did, and being born in Brahmaloga? Please, could you explain, Long Pa?
So the Brahma Loka, the Brahma worlds, they're separated by the minds that are of a Lokiya, worldly state, and of Lokutara, those who have gone beyond the world or have attained. And so there's the Brahmas that have, if they've attained to Anagami, the non-returner stage of enlightenment, then that they attained while they were in the human realm, then they're born as a Brahma in the Brahma world. And then from there, they can practice until they reach Nibbana, fully enlightened. And so they don't need to come back to be reborn in the Deva or human realms again. But the mind of the Brahma that has not yet attained to any noble attainments, Arya, Pugala, they are covering over the mental defilements. They have samadhi, or they have jhana, the mental absorptions, and they're not interested in experiencing or sense contact from the world. What they, all the sense experiences, sense contact through the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and the mind, any thoughts, they see it all as being sort of chaotic, or they don't want that. And so they develop and have samadhi to the level of either the first, second, third, fourth jhana, etc. And so then they're born into the Brahma world, depending on that level of samadhi that they have, but they have not yet won over or defeated, destroyed the defilements yet. It's similar to a rock that's placed on the grass, and the rock is there, but the roots are still intact. But if you take the rock off, then when the sun hits it, there's water, then the roots or the grass will grow again. And so the mind has not yet been purified or cleansed, but they're able to push and cover over those defilements through that samadhi. And so they also have a skill in developing and bringing up that samadhi. And so they're reborn into the Brahma world. But the Brahmas that are of the Lokiya, the worldly type without attainments, they have to be reborn again. But if they do meet with the Dhamma of the Lord Buddha, they may be able to reflect on that Dhamma, and it can change their minds, and they can attain to arahantship without much difficulty. That's because their level of samadhi is very high. They're very skilled at developing that samadhi. And so we can see that those arahants that have all the special knowledges, when they attain, they have a basis or foundation of a very high level of samadhi. Then they listen to the Dhamma from the Buddha or from a Savaka, a disciple, and they can attain straight away to arahantship. And so this is just something that's how it is. It's a part of the natural law of things. So the Brahma that has attained to anagami, non-returner already, then they can be reborn in one of the 5 levels or realms in the Brahma world. We call aviha, atapa, sudasa, sudasi, and sudawasa, sutawata. And so they will then from there practice onwards, increasing the purity of their mind till they become an arahant and attain to nibbana. But if they have a jhana of a worldly type, even if it's a rupa jhana, the formless jhanas, that has a very, very refined mind state, they'll still have to be reborn again because they haven't yet cleansed their mind or purified their mind. But the one who has purified their mind, then they've purified the mind from the causes of suffering, of rebirth, which is they have freed themselves from attachments and are able to then gain to arahantship. And so the Brahma realms or Brahmas are differentiated like that through the worldly, the Lokiya, and the Lokuttara, the one that's gone beyond the world. So in the beginning, just be able to get the first jhana, develop kanika samadhi, that momentary samadhi, stillness, the upajjhara samadhi, access, concentration, and then first jhana. You can do it. It just takes training. Whether you're a monk or a laity, you'll be able to do it. May you be able to put effort in and be diligent in this practice.